unusual satellite movements over the Persian Gulf, heightened chatter on Iranian military frequencies, and anomalous spikes in cyber traffic routing through proxy servers in Europe. Then, without formal declaration, the strikes materialized. US and Israeli forces, operating in seamless coordination, unleashed a barrage of precision-guided munitions deep into Iranian territory. Tomahawk missiles streaked from American warships in the Arabian Sea, slicing through the night to target underground facilities suspected of housing advanced centrifuge arrays for nuclear enrichment. Simultaneously, Israeli F-35 stealth fighters, slipping past radar nets under electronic warfare cover, delivered bunker-busting payloads on missile silos in the Zagros Mountains, where Iran's ballistic arsenal lay concealed in labyrinthine tunnels. The air vibrated with the hum of drones, American Reapers, and Israeli Herons loitering overhead, feeding real-time imagery back to command posts while launching their own strikes on command and control nodes in Tehran and Isfahan. But Iran was not caught unaware. Within hours, the retaliation unfolded with calculated fury, transforming the Middle East into a cauldron of fire and steel. Iranian Shahab-3 missiles fired from mobile launchers scattered across the desert, arced toward Israeli cities, their warheads programmed to evade Iron Dome interceptors through evasive maneuvers and decoys. Explosions rocked Tel Aviv and Haifa, shattering glass and sending civilians scrambling into bomb shelters as air raid sirens wailed. Concurrently, swarms of Iranian drone-shaped models, cheap yet deadly, converged on U.S. military bases in Iraq, Syria, and Jordan. Al-Asad Air Base in western Iraq bore the brunt, with barrages crumpling hangars and igniting fuel depots. While in Syria's Al-Tanith garrison, American troops hunkered down amid incoming fire that lit the horizon like a false dawn. Cyber elements amplified the chaos. Iranian hackers, long suspected of ties to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps cyber units, flooded U.S. and Israeli networks with denial love service attacks, temporarily disrupting logistics chains and satellite uplinks. This wasn't mere escalation. It was the eruption of a pressure cooker that had been simmering in the shadows for years, where espionage, deception, and digital sabotage had already drawn first blood. Amid this unfolding drama, reports trickled in from global monitoring stations of massive cyber incursions targeting Iran's own backbone. Power grids in key provinces flickered erratically. Government websites went dark under relentless distributed denial-of-service assaults. And industrial control systems at oil refineries showed signs of tampering valves mysteriously opening, pressures spiking beyond safety thresholds. Intelligence analysts pieced it together. These weren't random hacks, but a prelude. A digital feint orchestrated likely by U.S. Cyber Command and Israel's Unit 8200, softening the ground before kinetic strikes. The shadow conflict waged in code and covert channels had burst into the open, pulling the veil from a world where bits and bytes preceded bombs and bullets. If you're tuning in from a bustling cafe in Berlin, a quiet study in Tokyo, or anywhere else around the globe, drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from. And if this deep dive into the intelligence undercurrents of global flashpoints resonates with you, hit that like button, subscribe for more unfiltered analyses, and share it with fellow thinkers. Your support keeps these briefings coming. Now, let's peel back the layers further, as if we're declassifying a dossier straight from the vaults. This confrontation didn't ignite overnight. Long before the missiles flew, intelligence agencies like the CIA and Mossad had been weaving intricate webs of preparation, turning whispers into actionable insights. Picture it. In the years leading up, surveillance networks hummed with activity. Satellites from the National Reconnaissance Office orbited ceaselessly, their high-resolution cameras capturing thermal signatures from Iranian facilities' heat blooms, indicating centrifuge operations or missile fueling. Human intelligence assets cultivated over decades fed back ground truths, defectors from Iran's scientific community, embedded operatives in supply chains, even unwitting sources in international trade who unknowingly revealed procurement patterns for dual-use technologies. Cyber infiltration played a starring role, a silent vanguard in this prelude to war. Recall Stuxnet, that infamous worm deployed around 2010, a joint US-Israeli creation that infiltrated Iran's Natanz nuclear plant, spinning centrifuges to destruction while masking the sabotage as mechanical failure. That was just the opening act. In the intervening years, evolved variants and new tools burrowed deeper. Mossad's cyber specialists, drawing on recruits from Israel's tech-savvy youth, developed malware that lurked in Iranian networks, exfiltrating blueprints for hypersonic missiles or mapping vulnerabilities in air defense systems. The CIA, with its vast resources, coordinated with alias sharing intercepts from NSA listening posts that eavesdropped on Iranian communications, decrypting encrypted messages to reveal troop movements or procurement deals with Russia and China for advanced weaponry. Covert assets on the ground added the human element, that irreplaceable pulse of espionage. Recruited from ethnic minorities within Iran, Kurds, Balak, or disillusioned Persians, these agents conducted internal reconnaissance, photographing sites, planting tracking devices on vehicles, ferrying nuclear materials, or even sabotaging equipment with subtle defects. Psychological pressure mounted through disinformation campaigns, leaked documents suggesting internal betrayals, anonymous tips to Iranian security forces that sowed paranoia and prompted purges, weakening cohesion. Strategic intelligence gathering tied it all together, analysts poring over open-source data. From social media posts by Iranian officials to shipping manifests, building mosaics that predicted vulnerabilities. Spy networks, by their nature, operate in the twilight before war's dawn. They are ecosystems of deception, where case officers in embassies under diplomatic cover meet assets in neutral third countries. Like Turkey or the UAE, these networks don't just gather facts, they shape realities. A well-placed mole can delay a program by feeding false data or accelerate distrust by amplifying rumors. In the US-Israel-Iran triangle, this meant a perpetual chess game. Iran's Quds Force running agents in Iraq to monitor US bases, while the CIA flipped Iranian diplomats abroad, extracting secrets in exchange for asylum. The hidden intelligence rivalry here is a tale of mirrors and smoke. Iran, under its theocratic regime, views the US and Israel as existential threats, dubbing them the Great Satan and Little Satan. Its intelligence apparatus, the Ministry of Intelligence and Security, MOI alongside the IRGC's intelligence branch, excels in asymmetric warfare funding proxies like Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Houthis in Yemen. To probe Israeli defenses indirectly, Israel, with Mossad's legendary reach, counters through assassinations and sabotage. Think of the targeted killings of Iranian nuclear scientists, executed with magnetic bombs or remote sniper rifles, operations that delayed Tehran's atomic ambitions by years. The US, playing the long game, leverages its global alliances, the Five Eyes network, for signals intelligence, partnerships with Gulf states for basing rights to encircle Iran economically and militarily. Cyber warfare has revolutionized this rivalry, turning keyboards into weapons. Beyond Stuxnet, operations like Nitrozusa, US plan to cripple Iran's infrastructure digitally lurk. In classified files, Iranian hackers, in retaliation, have struck back. The 2012 Shamoon virus that wiped Saudi Aramco's computers, or attacks on US banks. These digital skirmishes erode trust, escalate tensions, and prepare the battlefield. Covert sabotage extends to physical realms. Mysterious explosions at Iranian missile sites, attributed to Israeli drones or insiders, or US sanctions that starve programs of parts, forcing reliance on black markets ripe for infiltration. Intelligence preparation behind modern military strikes is meticulous, a fusion of art and science. It starts with target identification, using AI to sift petabytes of data for patterns. Then comes validation, cross-checking with multiple sources to avoid decoys. Finally, execution planning, timing strikes to coincide with cyber disruptions, minimizing defenses. In this case, the coordinated U.S.-Israeli action likely stemmed from fused intelligence shared databases where CIA assessments met. Mossad fieldwork, predicting Iran's retaliation vectors and prepositioning assets accordingly. The evolution of shadow wars into open conflict is a gradual alchemy. Shadow wars thrive in ambiguity, deniable operations that achieve goals without full-scale war. But thresholds erode a cyber attack to bold, a sabotage to visible and suddenly, restraint fractures. Here, accumulated pressures from sanctions, proxy conflicts in Syria and Yemen, and Iran's advancing nuclear program push the envelope. Early covert actions against nuclear and missile programs set the stage. The 2007 Israeli strike on Syria's reactor, informed by Mossad intelligence, foreshadowed tactics against Iran. Operations like Olympic Games, Stuxnet's codename demonstrated how spies could halt proliferation without boots on the ground. Spy operations shape geopolitical outcomes in profound ways. They avert disasters. Think of intelligence that prevented Iranian plots against U.S. embassies or provoked them, as miscalculations spiral. In this rivalry, espionage has redrawn maps, weakening Iran's alliances, bolstering Israel's security, and maintaining U.S. dominance in the region. To understand the depths, we must rewind the clock, tracing the roots of this enmity through historical lenses. It begins with the fall of Iran's monarchy in 1979, a seismic shift that upended the Middle East's power balance. Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, installed after a 1953 CIA-orchestrated coup against Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, had nationalized oil, ruled with an iron fist, modernizing Iran but alienating clerics and the masses through repression and westernization. The Shah's secret police, SAVAK, trained partly by the CIA and Mossad, crushed dissent, fostering resentment that boiled over. The 1979 Islamic Revolution erupted like a dam breaking. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, exiled in Paris, rallied millions through cassette tapes smuggled into Iran. Decrying the Shah's corruption and U.S. imperialism, protests swelled, the military fractured, and the Shah fled in January 1979. Khomeini returned triumphantly, establishing the Islamic Republic, a theocracy blending Shia Islam with anti-Western fervor. The revolution's zeal peaked with the U.S. Embassy hostage crisis. Students stormed the compound in November 1979, holding 52 Americans for 444 days, humiliating President Jimmy Carter and severing diplomatic ties. Changing U.S.-Iran relations trace a path from alliance to antagonism. Pre-revolution, Iran was a U.S. pillar against Soviet influence, armed with American weapons. Post-revolution, it became a pariah, supporting militants, opposing Israel, and pursuing regional hegemony. The 1980s Iran-Iraq War saw the U.S. tilt toward Iraq, providing intelligence and ignoring Saddam Hussein's chemical attacks on Iranians, a betrayal etched in Tehran's memory. The 1988 downing of Iran Air Flight 655 by a U.S. warship, killing 290 civilians, further poisoned waters. Intelligence distrust formed over decades through betrayals and shadows. The CIA's role in the 1953 coup, codenamed Operation Ajax, sowed seeds of suspicion. Iranians viewed America as a meddler, overthrowing democracy for oil. Mossad's early ties with the Shah evaporated post-revolution, replaced by hostility as Iran armed anti-Israel groups. The 1990s and 2000s amplified this. Iran's covert nuclear program, revealed in 2002 by dissidents, triggered IAEA inspections and U.S. accusations of weapons pursuit. Sanctions followed, alongside Israeli threats of preemptive strikes. The 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action (JCPOA), brokered under Obama, briefly thawed relations, curbing Iran's enrichment in exchange for relief. Trump's 2018 withdrawal and maximum pressure. Campaign reignited hostilities culminating in the 2020 drone strike killing IRGC commander Qasem Soleimani. Layer by layer, these historical threads wove a tapestry of mutual paranoia. Iran's support for terrorism from the 1983 Beirut bombings to plots against dissidents abroad clashed with U.S. counterterrorism ops. Israel's assassinations of Iranian figures. Like the 2020 killing of nuclear scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh using a remote-controlled machine gun, exemplified precision espionage. Cyber realms added new distrust, Iran's attacks on U.S. infrastructure. Like the 2013 attempted hack on a New York dam, met with American indictments of Iranian hackers. As we delve deeper, the narrative reveals how these elements converged in recent years. Proxy wars in Syria pitted Iranian-backed forces against U.S.-supported rebels and Israeli airstrikes. Yemen's conflict saw Iranian missiles fueling Houthi attacks on Saudi Arabia. Drawing U.S. involvement. Economic warfare sanctions crippling Iran's economy pushed Tehran toward defiance, accelerating missile tests and uranium enrichment to near weapons-grade levels. Intelligence indicators now paint a picture of orchestration. Anomalous signals from Iranian submarines in the Strait of Hormuz, unusual diplomatic evacuations from Gulf embassies, and spikes in encrypted traffic among IRGC commanders suggest pre-positioning for escalation. Meanwhile, U.S. carrier groups steamed into position. Israeli special forces heightened readiness, and cyber defenses braced for counterstrikes. Yet, as missiles continue to arc across skies and digital fortresses crumble under assault, a chilling realization emerges from the classified briefs. What the world witnesses, the fiery exchanges, the blaring alerts, may merely be the surface ripple of a submerged leviathan. Deeper operations, seeded years ago through infiltrated networks and dormant assets, could be activating now, poised to reshape the region in ways yet unseen, as the true depth of this intelligence-driven maelstrom begins to unfold. With agents activating sleeper cells and digital backdoors springing to life in the heart of adversarial systems. Intelligence agencies don't merely react to conflicts, they sculpt them from the shadows, influencing outcomes far beyond the visible clash of arms. Consider Mossad's covert penetration efforts inside Iran, a masterclass in deep cover operations honed over decades. Israeli operatives, often drawing from Iran's expatriate communities or ethnic minorities like the Azeris and Kurds, embed themselves in societal fabric, posing as businessmen in Tehran's bazaars, academics at universities in Mashhad, or even law-level bureaucrats in provincial offices. These assets don't just spy, they cultivate influence, identifying disillusioned insiders within the nuclear program or the IRGC, who can be turned with promises of defection or financial incentives. Mossad's penetration has yielded dividends, blueprints smuggled out via encrypted thumb drives, coordinates of hidden labs relayed through dead drops in border regions. One such effort, whispered in declassified snippets, involved recruiting a network of truck drivers ferrying materials to Fordo's underground enrichment site, allowing trackers to map supply routes vulnerable to interdiction. Parallel to this, the CIA's long-term strategic containment policies form a web of encirclement, designed to constrict Iran's ambitions without direct confrontation. Rooted in Cold War-era doctrines adapted for the post-9/11 world, these policies blend economic pressure with intelligence dominance. The agency maintains a constellation of listening posts in neighboring countries' bases in Turkey for intercepting cross-border communications, assets in Afghanistan before the withdrawal for monitoring eastern frontiers. Containment manifests in alliances, bolstering Saudi Arabia's intelligence capabilities to counter Iranian influence in Yemen, or sharing satellite imagery with the UAE to track Iranian naval movements in the Gulf. CIA analysts in Virginia pore over predictive models, forecasting how sanctions might force Iran into risky escalations. While covert funds support opposition groups inside Iran, amplifying voices of dissent through underground media. This isn't brute force. It's a patient erosion where intelligence shapes policy to isolate Iran diplomatically, as seen in lobbying efforts to scuttle European trade deals that could ease Tehran's isolation. Yet, Iran's counterintelligence responses, spearheaded by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps networks, form a formidable shield against these incursions. The IRGC's intelligence arm, a blend of ideological fervor and technical prowess, excels in rooting out infiltrators through pervasive surveillance neighborhood watch committees that report suspicious activities, facial recognition at airports scanning for foreign operatives. They've dismantled Mossad rings multiple times in 2018. Iranian authorities paraded arrested agents on state TV, claiming to have thwarted plots against nuclear sites. Counterintelligence extends abroad, with IRGC operatives in Europe monitoring dissident communities, using honey traps or intimidation to silence critics. This cat-and-mouse game heightens assassination fears on all sides. Israeli officials wary of IRGC hit squads, Iranian scientists traveling with bodyguards after a string of killings attributed to Mossad, like the 2012 car bombing of Mostafa Ahmed Roshan in Tehran. Sabotage operations add layers. Mysterious fires at petrochemical plants blamed on Israeli drones prompt IRGC sweeps that uncover bugs in secure facilities. Cyber espionage intensifies the paranoia. Iran's Ghost Fleet hackers retaliate against perceived U.S. intrusions by targeting American contractors, stealing data to expose vulnerabilities. Regional proxy intelligence structures amplify this rivalry, turning the Middle East into a chessboard of indirect confrontations. Iran's Quds Force builds intelligence hubs through allies. Hezbollah in Lebanon runs surveillance on Israeli borders feeding Tehran real-time data on troop deployments, while in Iraq's popular mobilization, Unisite militias with IRGC ties monitor U.S. bases, planting informants among local staff. Israel counters with its own proxies, supporting Kurdish groups in northern Iraq for cross-border intel on Iranian movements, or collaborating with Sunni tribes in Syria to disrupt supply lines to Hezbollah. The U.S. weaves in through CENTCOM, coordinating with Jordanian intelligence to track Iranian arms smuggling. These structures aren't just spies, they're force multipliers where a Houthi drones strike in Yemen. Informed by Iranian satellite cues, test Saudi defenses and indirectly pressures U.S. allies. Information warfare and psychological operations weave through it all, blurring lines between truth and deception. U.S. and Israeli psyops flood Iranian social media with memes, questioning regime competence videos of failed missile tests, amplified to erode public morale. Iran retaliates with state media broadcasts accusing the West of fabricating nuclear accusations, while hacking groups like Charming Kittenfish dissidents to sow distrust. These ops precondition populations. Israelis braced for rocket barrages through simulated alerts. Iranians rallied by narratives of resistance against imperialists. Modern wars in this lens are forged by intelligence years before kinetic strike scenarios war-gamed in simulations. Alliances forged in secret summits, vulnerabilities exploited through patient cultivation. A single intercepted shipment of centrifuge parts can delay a program by months, shifting the balance without a shot fired. Leadership responses, viewed through this analytical prism, reveal calculated geopolitical maneuvering. Donald Trump, during his tenure and in subsequent rhetoric, embodied a doctrine of maximum pressure withdrawing from the JCPOA to isolate Iran economically, while authorizing the Soleimani strike move, intelligence-driven, based on reports of imminent threats to U.S. personnel. His messaging, blunt and transactional, signaled to allies like Israel that America would back assertive actions, fostering a climate where containment edged toward confrontation. Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's long-serving prime minister, positioned himself as the vanguard against Iranian expansionism, using intelligence briefings in UN speeches famously waving files on Iran's nuclear prosody, helped archives stolen by Mossad to rally international support. His strategic calculus portrays Iran as an existential threat to justify preemptive measures, strengthening domestic coalitions while deepening U.S.-Israeli intelligence sharing. On the Iranian side, the supreme leadership under Ayatollah Ali Khamenei frames responses in terms of steadfast resistance, vetoing concessions that could signal weakness. Messaging through state channels emphasizes asymmetric capabilities, proxies, and missiles as deterrents, with intelligence calculations weighing the costs of escalation against the benefits of projecting strength, often opting for calibrated retaliations to avoid all-out war. Operation-style retaliatory campaigns emerge from this interplay, structured like covert ops but scaled for impact. Iran's true promise operations, for instance, mirror Israel's targeted strikes, missile volleys timed for maximum psychological effect, informed by intelligence on Israeli defense gaps. These aren't impulsive. They're calibrated based on SIGINT assessments of adversary responses. A barrage on U.S. bases provoke invasion or merely reinforce deterrence. Intelligence calculations determine the ladder of escalation or restraint. U.S. war planners, drawing on NSA intercepts, might hold fire if data suggests Iranian restraint, while Mossad tips could trigger preemptive cyber shutdowns of launch sites. Restraint often prevails when intel reveals mutual vulnerabilities. Iran aware of U.S. submarine patrols, America cognizant of IRGC swarms that could overwhelm defenses. As the scope widens, the ripples of this conflict destabilize the broader Middle East, where fragile balances teeter. Instability surges in Lebanon, where Hezbollah's mobilization against Israel strains an already crumbling economy, displacing communities and inflating refugee flows into Syria and Jordan. Iraq becomes a tinderbox, with U.S. bases under fire prompting militia clashes that undermine Baghdad's fragile government, risking sectarian strife anew. Military alliances snap to alert. NATO's eastern flank watches warily as Russia. Iran's arms supplier might divert resources, while the Abraham Accords nations UAE, Bahrain bolster defenses, sharing intel with Israel to counter Iranian drones. CENTCOM repositions assets, from carriers in the Mediterranean to air wings in Qatar, signaling readiness that deters but also provokes. Energy markets feel the shockwaves immediately, with Brent crude spiking as traders factor in risks to the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of global oil flows. Iranian threats to mine the strait, backed by intelligence on mine-laying capabilities, could choke supplies, hammering economies from Europe to Asia. Stockpiles in Saudi Arabia offer buffers, but prolonged disruption invites recessionary pressures, with gas prices soaring in the U.S. and inflation rippling globally. The risk of wider regional war looms largest. A specter intelligence agencies game out in classified scenarios. A miscalculated strike, say, an Iranian missile hitting a civilian target in Israel could draw in Saudi Arabia, escalating to a multi-front conflagration involving Turkey's interests in Syria or even Pakistan's nuclear calculus if borders inflame. Proxies could ignite flashpoints, Houthis targeting Red Sea shipping, pulling in Egypt, or Azerbaijan's tensions with Iran spilling over, involving Armenia and Russia. Global powers hover. China, Iran's economic lifeline, might mediate to protect oil imports, while Europe pushes diplomacy to avert migration crises. Intelligentsia becomes the arbitrary warnings from satellites detecting troop builds, or cyber probes revealing intent could tip the scales toward de-escalation or doom, as the echoes of explosions fade into strategic pauses, and analysts sift through after-action reports in bunkered rooms. The narrative slows to contemplate the essence of this upheaval. Missiles streak across screens, drones hum in the night, but beneath it all lies a substratum of maneuvers invisible to the eye agents whispering in ears. Codes cracking open secrets, alliances forged in the dim light of necessity. The strikes that lit the skies were not born in isolation. They were the culmination of dossiers compiled over years, vulnerabilities probed in silence, and decisions weighed in the balance of shadows. So we must pose the central analytical question that hangs over this intelligence tapestry. Was this war truly started by missiles, or by years of invisible intelligence warfare, where the first salvos were fired in the ether of espionage long before the world took notice? If this exploration into the hidden gears of geopolitics has sharpened your perspective, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to stay ahead of the curve with more such breakdowns, and share it far and wide to spark informed discussions. And in the comments, tell us where in the world are you tuning in from. For those seeking to dive deeper, check the video description for a curated list of sources and references that informed this analysis. This content is based on geopolitical analysis, publicly available information, and historical intelligence research, presented for educational and informational purposes only, without taking political sides.